"Don't insult me that way." Rose Mercer said it with her wrists tied high against the cabin doorway, her dress twisted from the struggle, and the whole hot afternoon staring at her like it had come to watch. From the road below, it looked wrong in the worst possible way. A young woman, barefoot and shaking, pinned up in a doorway, a man old enough to be her father standing just outside, looking up at her in a way no decent man should. Two others laughing like they had paid for the show, and another one hanging back near the steps, watching it all like this kind of cruelty had become ordinary to him. That was the first picture Elias Rourke saw when he rode up from the lower trail. For one hard second, even he thought he was too late to stop something ugly. The summer of 1887 had baked Bitterroot Valley dry. Dust clung to Elias's boots, his hat brim, and the neck of the bay gelding he was leading toward Stevensville. He was 49, broad in the shoulders, gray in the beard, worn in the way mountain men get worn after too many cold nights and too many late meals. He had stopped at the Mercer place for one reason only: water for the horse. He saw the trough first, then the open door, then Rose bound upright against the frame with her hands tied above her head. Her cheeks were wet, her chin was still lifted. Silas Pruitt stood in the yard like a buyer at auction. Thick through the middle, clean boots, dead eyes, Gideon Mercer stood beside him with a grin that looked mean even from a distance. Harlan and Buck leaned on the porch rail. Eve hovered near the steps, nervous and eager at the same time. Silas looked Rose over in a slow way that made Elias's jaw tighten. Buck laughed and said she ought to be grateful any man still wanted her. Gideon spat into the dirt and told her she'd marry who paid for her. She had tried to run that morning. Harlan dragged her back before she got past the lower fence, so Gideon tied her to the door where everyone could see her. That was his way of teaching her what happened to a woman who said no in that house. That was when Rose lifted her head and said those 5 words, not loud, not trembling, just proud enough to shame every man standing there. "Don't insult me that way," Silas smirked. Harlan reached for the hem of her dress like he meant to prove she had no right to speak proud at all. That was the moment Elias moved. He stepped off the road and up toward the porch without hurrying. He did not shout first. Men like Gideon Mercer had heard shouting all their lives. What they noticed was the kind of quiet that meant trouble was walking straight at them. Gideon turned and narrowed his eyes. "This is family business," he said. Elias stopped at the bottom step. "Family business didn't look like that," he said. Buck snorted. Silas gave Rose another long look, then glanced at Elias as if measuring whether the old mountain man was worth dealing with. Rose saw Elias clearly for the first time then. He wasn't kneeling for her. He wasn't there to lay a hand on her. He wasn't another man come to bargain. He was looking at the rope, then at the bruises on her arm, then at Gideon. That look changed something in her face. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first thin crack in hopelessness. Harlan jumped down from the porch and came at Elias with the swagger of a man who had only ever fought weaker people. Elias let him come close. Then he drove a fist into Harlan's mouth so hard the younger man spun and hit the rail. Buck lunged next. Elias caught him by the shirt and slammed him shoulder first into the post. Rose flinched when Aoife grabbed for the rope over her wrists, trying to hold her in place while the men fought below. Silas backed up one step, cursing. Gideon did not back up at all. He reached through the open door and came out with a shotgun. Everything stopped. The valley wind moved through the cottonwoods. A horse stamped near the trough. Rose was still tied to her own door like livestock. Elias stood in the dust below the porch, breathing hard, his fists ready, his eyes on the gun. Gideon leveled the barrels at his chest. Rose gave the smallest shake of her head. Just once, like she already knew what would happen if he tried to play hero with a shotgun pointed at his heart. "Take one more step, old man, and I'll leave you for the flies." Rose swallowed, then looked at Elias with fear sharper than before. Not fear for herself, fear that the only man who had stepped in might die right there in her yard. Elias had come for water. Now he was staring down a shotgun. A crooked father. 3 sons mean enough to help him. And one battered young woman who still had enough pride left to say no. So what was he supposed to do next? ride away and save his skin, or stay and risk his life for a woman he had only known for a single terrible minute. Elias didn't move for a long second, not because he was scared, but because he was thinking faster than he looked. A shotgun at that distance didn't leave much room for mistakes. He had seen men die for less than this. Gideon kept the barrel steady, his eyes flat and certain, like he had pointed that gun at people before. Rose shifted slightly against the rope, the wood of the door creaking behind her. Elias noticed how her hands had gone pale from being tied too tight. He also noticed she didn't beg. That mattered more than most things. Elias raised his hands just enough to show he wasn't reaching for his gun. He took one slow step back into the dust, then another. Harlan spat blood and started laughing again, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Buck leaned on the post and grinned like nothing had happened. Silas looked annoyed more than anything else, like a deal was being delayed. Gideon lowered the shotgun a little, but not all the way. "Get off my land," he said. Elias nodded once. He turned, took his horse by the reins, and walked back down the short path toward the road. He didn't look back. When he did look back, Rose was still there, still tied to her own door, still watching him. That look followed him all the way down the trail. He had seen hungry winters, bad men, and graves nobody visited twice, but there was something about that look that stayed under his skin. Not because she had begged him to stay. She hadn't. It stayed with him because she had looked like someone trying not to break in front of men who had spent years trying to break her. He rode into Stevensville just before sundown, dust hanging in the air like a thin fog. The town was small, but busy enough. A few wagons, a couple of riders, and the usual mix of men who worked too hard and talked too much at the end of the day. Elias tied his horse outside a general store and stepped in for water and feed. He told himself he was done with the Mercer place. A man like him knew better than to fix every broken thing he saw. But the trouble was, once you saw something like that, it didn't leave easy. Inside the store, two men were talking near the counter. They weren't whispering. Men like that never did. "Heard Gideon's finally settling that debt," one said. Other man nodded. "About time. How's he paying it?" The first one asked. The second man gave a short laugh. "Same way he handles everything, using what ain't really his." Elias slowed his step just enough to listen without making it obvious. "He's marrying that girl off," the man went on, "to Silas Pruitt, gets him clear on cattle money, and Silas gets access to that creek behind the Mercer land." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. That creek wasn't just water. In that valley, water meant grass, grass meant cattle, and cattle meant a man could make money for years without ever leaving his land. A woman stepped out from behind a shelf nearby. Mrs. Delaney. She looked at Elias like she already knew what he had seen. That land was her mother's, she said quietly. Elias turned to her. "You sure of that?" he asked. "Sure as I'm standing here," she said. "A man came in years ago, married the widow, then buried her, and never let that girl make a single decision since." Elias said nothing. Miss Delaney leaned closer. "If he marries her off, that land won't ever be hers again," she said. "That's the whole play." Elias stepped outside with a small sack of feed he didn't really need. The sun was dropping low, painting the valley gold. He should have ridden out right then, kept his head down, stayed out of it. That was the smart way, but smart didn't always sit right with a man after a certain age. By then, a man usually knew the difference between trouble and shame. Trouble was something you could ride around. Shame was what followed you when you kept riding after seeing something no decent man should ignore. As he walked toward the hitching post, he saw Buck Mercer across the street. Rose was with him, not free, just not tied this time. Buck held her arm tight, steering her toward the church like she might bolt any second. Rose caught sight of Elias, just for a second. No words, just that same look. Not begging, not weak, just tired of being treated like something to trade. Buck pulled her along and she didn't fight. They disappeared inside, and before long, Elias saw Buck lead her back out again toward the road that ran home. He stood still until they were gone from sight. 3 days, Gideon had said, maybe less now. Elias looked down at his hands, then back toward the church doors. He could ride out before dark and never see any of them again. Or he could turn around, walk back in there, and start something he might not be able to finish. So what kind of man was he going to be this time? Elias stood there a long moment after they were gone from sight. He could have walked away. Men did it every day out there. They saw trouble, tipped their hat, and kept riding. No shame in that. Not in a place where getting involved could get you buried. But that picture kept coming back. Her tied to that door. Her saying those 5 words like they still meant something. He let out a slow breath, then turned, not toward the road, toward the back of the church. A place like Stevensville didn't have many secrets. If a man wanted a quiet word, he didn't go through the front. He circled wide, boots crunching gravel, keeping to the shade of the building. There was a narrow space behind the church, near the hitching rail, and a stack of old crates. That's where he waited. It didn't take long. Buck came out first, alone, lighting a cigarette like he had all the time in the world. Elias stepped out of the shadow. Buck froze for half a second, then squinted. "You again?" Elias didn't answer right away. He just looked at the man's hand, still holding the match. Then he stepped closer and knocked it clean out of his fingers. "We're going to talk," Elias said. Buck smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ain't nothing to talk about. That girl's getting married. Simple as that." Elias grabbed him by the collar and shoved him back against the wall hard enough to rattle the boards. "Don't lie to me," he said. "Not about this." Buck's grin slipped just a little. "You don't know a thing, old man." Elias leaned in closer, voice low. "I know enough. I know that land ain't Gideon's." That got Buck's attention, just for a second, then he tried to laugh it off. "You've been talking to the wrong people." Elias didn't let go. He tightened his grip until Buck's face changed color. Then he spoke slow, like a man laying cards on a table. "There's a creek behind that house. Good water. Only reason Silas is interested." That smile came back, thinner now. "So what if there is?" Elias gave him one sharp push and let him go. Buck stumbled forward, then straightened his shirt, trying to look like he was still in control. "This ain't your business," he said. Elias nodded. "That's what you keep saying." Then he stepped in again, fast this time, and drove a short punch into Buck's ribs, not enough to drop him, enough to make him talk. Buck sucked in air, bent a little, then spat to the side. "All right," he said. "All right. Silas wants the water. Gideon wants the debt gone. Girl signs. Marries. It all lines up." Elias watched him closely. "What if she don't sign?" Buck gave a crooked grin. "She will. One way or another. Even if we have to drag her to the altar and hold her there." That was all Elias needed to hear. He stepped back and let Buck go for good. Buck didn't stick around. He walked off quick, like a man who suddenly remembered somewhere else he needed to be. Elias stayed there a moment, thinking. Now it was clear. This wasn't just a bad family. This was a deal, and Rose was right in the middle of it. He made his way across town to Mrs. Delaney's place. Small house, clean porch, wind chimes that had seen better days. She opened the door before he even knocked twice. "You went back," she said. Elias nodded. They had her inside the church not long ago. Buck took her back toward the house after that. Mrs. Delaney stepped aside. "Come in." They sat at a small table. No fuss, no wasted words. "You were right," Elias said. "About the land." Mrs. Delaney gave a tired smile. "I usually am. When it comes to things folks try to hide." Elias leaned forward. "You know where her mother kept papers? Real ones. Not talk. Proof." Mrs. Delaney didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long second, like she was weighing more than just the question. Then she spoke. "There might be something. Old place, under the hearth," she said. "That's where her mother used to keep things no one else was meant to find." Elias sat back. That was it. A real lead. Something solid. But it also meant one thing. He'd have to go back there, not for a fight this time, for something quieter and maybe more dangerous. Mrs. Delaney poured him a cup of coffee. "You planning to walk away?" she asked. Elias looked down at the cup, then out the window toward the fading light. "No," he said, "not this time. If this story's pulling you in, take a second to subscribe. And while you settle in with a cup of coffee or tea, tell me what time it is where you are and where you're listening from." Because Elias wasn't just heading back to that land. He was walking into a house that already knew his face. And this time, getting out was going to be a whole lot harder. Elias didn't wait for full dark. Men who waited too long usually talked themselves out of doing what needed to be done. By the time the last light slid off the hills, he was already riding back toward the Mercer place, keeping off the main path, cutting through dry grass and low brush. The valley had gone quiet in that way it does after sunset. No wind, no voices, just the sound of leather and slow hooves. He tied his horse farther out this time, behind a stand of cottonwoods where no one would spot it from the house. Then he walked in. No rush, no noise, same cabin, same door. But it felt different now, like the place knew he was coming. A dim light burned inside. Voices, too. Low, rough, tired from drink. Elias moved along the sidewall and stopped near the back window. He listened. Gideon was talking. Couldn't hear every word, but enough. 2 days, maybe less. Silas was pushing to finish fast. Harlan cursed about his jaw. Buck laughed, said it would heal. Eve said nothing. That silence again. Elias shifted and circled to the back door. It wasn't locked. Men like Gideon didn't think they needed locks. They thought fear was enough. Elias stepped inside. The air smelled like whiskey, sweat, and old wood. The room was empty. Voices were coming from the front. Good. That gave him a few seconds. He moved straight to the hearth. Kneeling down, he ran his hand across the stones. Old, worn, but not set tight, just like Mrs. Delaney said. He took his knife and worked the edge between two flat rocks. One shifted, then another. Slow, careful. But nothing was under them except old dirt and ash. From the front room, a chair scraped. Someone laughed. Elias froze, waited. No footsteps coming. He moved one more stone, still nothing. Only when he pried up the fourth one did the dirt feel looser beneath his hand. He dug with his fingers, dry at first, then softer, then cloth. He felt it before he saw it. A bundle, wrapped tight in old oilcloth. He pulled it up, brushing dirt away. His heart didn't race. Men like him didn't get excited easy. But this mattered. This was the kind of thing men killed for. He unwrapped just enough to see paper. Old, folded, but still whole. Before he could open it, a floorboard creaked behind him. Elias turned fast. Rose stood there, barefoot again, hair loose, eyes wide, but not afraid of him. "You came back," she said, barely above a whisper. Elias held up the bundle. Found it. For a second, something soft crossed her face. Relief. Then it was gone. "They'll kill you if they find you here," she said. Elias shook his head once. "Not tonight. Not if we move now." Rose stepped closer, glancing toward the front room. "They're drinking," she said, "but not enough. Harlan ain't sleeping light no more." Elias wrapped the papers back tight. "Can you walk out of here without them seeing you?" She gave a small nod. Back door, then the trees. Elias stood. For a brief moment, they were close enough to feel each other's breath. Not romantic, not soft. Just two people standing in the middle of something dangerous, knowing there was no clean way out. "You sure about this?" he asked. Rose looked straight at him. "I was sure the moment you stepped in for me at that door." That was enough. Elias moved first, slow and steady toward the back. Rose followed, each step measured, each sound held tight. They reached the door. Elias eased it open. Cool night air slipped in. Freedom was right there. 3 steps away. Maybe 4. Then a voice cut through the house. "If." Soft, shaky, but loud enough. "Pa." The back door's open. She's gone. Everything stopped. Chairs scraped hard this time. Boots hit the floor. Harlan's voice came sharp and angry. "Where is she?" Elias looked at Rose. No time left. Not for quiet. Not for careful. Only one way out now, And it was going to make a whole lot of noise, because this time they weren't just sneaking out. They were about to run straight into every man in that house. Elias didn't think twice. He grabbed Rose's hand and pulled her through the back door just as boots slammed against the floor behind them. They ran. Not fast at first. Careful. Low. Then Harlan's voice tore through the night behind them. There. That was all it took. Elias pushed Rose ahead. Run now. No looking back. They broke into a full sprint across the yard, past the fence, toward the dark line of trees where his horse was tied. The ground was uneven. Dry dirt, loose stones, old roots. Rose stumbled once, her bare feet cut by sharp stones and her wrists still burning from the rope. Elias caught her without stopping, behind them. The door burst open. Men poured out, shouting, cursing. Gideon's voice cut through the rest. Don't let them get to the trees. A shotgun fired. The sound cracked across the valley, loud enough to wake anyone within a mile. The shot went wide, but not by much. Dirt kicked up near Elias's boots. He didn't slow down. They hit the fence line. Elias threw his weight into it, snapping one loose board, making a gap just wide enough. He shoved Rose through first, then followed. Harlan was closing fast. Too fast. That man could run. Elias knew they wouldn't make the trees clean, and so he turned just for a second. Enough to stop Harlan's charge. Harlan came in swinging, wild, angry. Elias met him head on, one step in. Short punch to the throat. Not pretty. Not fancy. Just enough to break his breath. Harlan dropped to one knee, choking, grabbing at his neck. Elias didn't stay. Didn't finish it. He turned and ran again. Rose was already halfway to the trees. Good. She was learning fast. Another shot rang out, this one closer. A branch snapped above them. Elias reached the horse first. He cut the rope with one quick motion and pulled himself up. Then he reached down. Rose didn't hesitate. She took his hand and he pulled her up behind him. No saddle talk, no wasted time. He turned the horse and drove it forward hard. The animal surged into the trees, branches slapping past, hooves pounding soft dirt now instead of dry yard. Behind them, voices faded, not gone, but falling behind. No one followed into the trees right away. Men like Gideon didn't like riding blind in the dark, not unless they had to. Elias didn't slow the horse until they were deep enough that the cabin lights were gone. Only then did he ease back, letting the animal breathe. Rose held on tight behind him, not clinging out of fear, just steady, like she meant to stay on. For a while, neither of them said anything, just the sound of the horse moving through the trees. Then Rose spoke, quiet but clear. You really came back? Elias nodded once, said I would. She let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. No one ever does. Elias didn't answer that. They rode until the land dipped and opened into a small clearing near the creek. Elias slowed the horse to a stop. Water moved soft over stones nearby. Safe enough for a minute. He climbed down first, then helped Rose off. She stood there, catching her breath, looking around like she wasn't used to standing anywhere without being watched. When she lifted her hands, Elias saw the rope marks plain in the moonlight. Angry red at the wrists, one ankle was scraped raw too. She noticed him looking and lowered her hands right away, like pain was something she had learned to hide before anybody could pity her for it. Elias pulled the bundle from his coat and handed it to her. This is yours. Rose took it slow, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. She unwrapped the cloth just enough to see the papers inside. Her hand shook, not weak, just shaken. My mama's, she said. Elias nodded. Looks that way. For a second, her eyes filled, but she blinked it back. No tears falling. Not here, not now. We ain't safe yet, Elias said. She looked up. I know. He glanced back the way they came. They'll come looking at first light, maybe sooner if they get brave. Rose wrapped the bundle tight again. What do we do? Elias thought about that. There were a lot of bad options. Only a few good ones, and none of them easy. We don't run forever, he said. We make it stop. Rose studied him. You mean fight them? Elias shook his head a little. Not just them. All of it. The lies, the deal, and the way they think they own you. Rose looked down at the papers, then back at him. Something had changed in her face. Less fear, more fire. Then we don't hide, she said. Elias gave a small nod. No, we don't. But he also knew something she didn't yet. This wasn't going to end out here in the dark. It was going to end in front of people, in daylight, where everyone could see, and that meant going back. Back to the same place she had been tied to that door. Back to the same men who had tried to break her. Back to a town that hadn't decided which side it was on. So the real question now wasn't whether they could escape. It was whether they were ready to walk straight back in and force the whole town to choose. Elias didn't wait for the sun to rise all the way. He rode straight back toward town with Rose behind him and the papers held tight between them like they mattered more than anything else in that valley. Because they did. This time, they didn't hide. They didn't circle wide. They didn't sneak. They rode right down the main road into Stevensville where people could see them. Heads turned. Men stepped out of the store. Women paused on porches. Word traveled fast. It always did in small places. By the time Elias pulled the horse to a stop near the church, a small crowd had already formed. Rose climbed down on her own. No hesitation. No looking back. Just steady steps forward. The same girl who had been tied to a door like something to sell was now standing in the open, with dirt on her feet and truth in her hands. Gideon arrived not long after, Harlan with him, face bruised, rage barely held in. Buck stayed a step behind. Eve, too, and Silas Pruitt came from the other side, drawn in like a man who didn't want to lose what he thought he had already bought. Sheriff Keene stood near the edge of the crowd, watching, waiting. Like a man who knew this moment was going to decide something bigger than just one family. Rose didn't wait for anyone to speak for her. She stepped forward and held up the papers. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. This land was my mother's, and I won't let any man trade me or my land away like I was cattle. She said it simple. No shaking, no apology. She told them how she had been kept from it, how she had been treated, how she had been tied to her own door. Some men looked down. Some didn't. That was the truth of it. Elias stood just behind her, not in front, not over her. Just there, the way a man stands when he's not taking a voice away, but making sure it isn't taken again. Gideon tried to laugh it off, said it was family matters, said she was confused, said papers didn't mean much without proof. That was when Elias stepped forward. Just one step, long enough to let Gideon know this wasn't going to slide by. Then Sheriff Keene moved. He took the papers, looked them over, looked at Rose, then at Gideon. Silas started talking fast, saying none of it proved a thing. Gideon called it family business again. But this time the crowd didn't stay quiet. A woman near the church steps said she had seen the bruises before. Then another voice said Rose had never looked willing a day in her life. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. Nobody was smiling now. Not even the men who had come mostly to watch a little trouble before supper. In places like that, justice didn't always come from books. Sometimes it came when enough people finally got tired of calling evil a private matter. And that day, something shifted. Sheriff Keene folded the papers once, looked Gideon in the eye, and told him Rose would not be leaving that square with him. Gideon didn't win. Silas didn't get his deal, and Rose didn't go back to that door. The land stayed where it belonged, with the woman who had finally stood up and said no, and for Elias, that was enough. He didn't ride out the next morning. Didn't pack his things and disappear like men like him often did. He stayed, not because she needed saving anymore, but because sometimes, after all the dust settles, a man realizes he doesn't want to keep riding alone. Weeks passed. The cabin changed. Boards got fixed. The door got rehung. Not as a place to be tied to, but as a place to walk through freely. Rose changed too, not into someone new, but into who she had always been. Before the world tried to press her down, she laughed a little more easily now. Not often, just enough to let a man know the house had changed. Sometimes Elias would hear her humming near the stove, and that quiet sound did more for the place than all the hammering and new boards ever could. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, she stood beside Elias on that same porch. Quiet, simple, real. "You still planning on leaving?" she asked. Elias looked out over the land, then back at her. "Not today," he said, and for the first time in a long while, he meant it. That was enough. "Now I'll tell you something. Just between us, stories like this stay with a man, not because of the fight, not even because of the land. They stay with him because every now and then, somebody decides wrong is wrong, even when it would be easier to ride away. So let me ask you this. How many times have you seen something wrong and told yourself it wasn't your place? A man can live a long time with that kind of silence. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and like the video. And subscribe to the channel. And if you made it this far, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I read those more than you might think. One quick note before we part ways. This story was gathered and retold from older accounts with a few details shaped to bring out its lesson and its human side. The images in this video were created with AI to help carry the feeling a little deeper. And the title and thumbnail were chosen to bring that feeling across in a stronger way. If this one stayed with you, leave me a comment and let me know. That's how I know which stories are worth bringing back to this fire. 'Cause out here, and even today, the question still stands. When the moment comes, will you ride on, or will you stop and stand your ground?